Hi guys, this is B. For my presentation, I will be focusing on modifying cat behavior using operant conditioning. So this is my cat. His name is Sabit. He's 10 years old and he's a very good boy, but he does have some bad habits. He really likes eating my plants and he can just keep eating for hours and hours, and it's never really been a problem until he started getting older, and so now it's actually starting to get a little bit bad for his health. And he does love this one specifically, but he'll eat my vines as well. He'll knock over my cacti, which is hazardous, and he's ruined my plants. So I want to keep my plants happy, and I want to keep my boy happy, of course, and I just want to see him healthy. So that's why I chose this behavior. So operant conditioning, just to begin with, is the probability of a behavior occurring that can be manipulated based on the consequences that will follow. And this is used only to manipulate observable behavior responses and not necessarily involuntary reactions like classical conditioning would do. And so in this case, the behavior that I will be trying to manipulate is his plant eating habits, and this is an observable behavior, not a reaction, which is why operant conditioning would be the best fit. And just for a little bit of background on operant conditioning, this was introduced by Thorndike when he introduced his law of effects, and this discovery was come to by Thorndike when he utilized the puzzle box, in which a hungry cat was placed in a puzzle box and a dish of food was right outside of it. And to reach the food, the cat had to learn how to escape the box by learning how to open the gate. And so this behavior, once it was learned, it would occur more frequently and more accurately, indicating that the behavior had been learned. Another important figure to note is B.F. Skinner. Skinner took what Thorndike had said and he basically furthered it to say that not all behaviors are reflexive, and this was important because at the time people were thinking that, every behavior could potentially just be a reflex and something that we do without thinking. And so Skinner said there's a distinction. There are behaviors that we can control and there are reflexive behaviors that are entirely different. And so what we're seeing in my cat is not necessarily reflexive behavior, because it's not like he sees the plant and he automatically starts chomping, but rather he decides to walk up to it and he decides to start chewing on it. And this is an important distinction to make in operant conditioning. So there is some terminology that should be cleared up before we actually begin with the plan. So the first thing to note is a response, and a response is typically what determines a certain consequence. So in this scenario, in this situation, the response will be Sabit nibbling on a plant, and we hope to manipulate this response to make sure that he decreases that behavior. And the action that will increase or decrease the behavior is the consequence. So in this scenario, the consequence will be Sabit being sprayed by water, and I will make sure not to spray him in his face, in his nose, in his ears, or anything. I'll keep it to the belly and, the legs and stuff, just because I love him and I don't want to traumatize him. And another term worth noting is a discriminative stimulus, and that is what precedes the response and shows that the consequence is available. So in this case, my discriminative stimulus will actually be me with a water spray bottle. And so luckily this is a little bit established with the spray bottle, because when he sees a spray bottle, he does know that there's water in there, and he does know that he can get sprayed by it, even if we haven't, really been spraying him with it. So this is kind of a plus for me, because he already does know that if I have a spray bottle, there's the chance that, I could spray him. So the next question that we would need to ask before we actually start is, would we want to utilize reinforcement or punishment? So before we begin, first let's go over positive versus negative. And positive refers to any addition of a stimulus. It doesn't mean that the stimulus is necessarily bad or good, it just means that something is being added, whereas negative refers to the absence of a stimulus. So this might mean taking away something that's good or taking away something that's bad. The next part would be whether or not we are using reinforcement or punishment. So reinforcement refers to anything that is done that increases the likelihood of a behavior occurring, and punishment refers to the likelihood of a behavior decreasing based on what is done. So in this scenario, we will be using positive punishment. It is positive because we are adding a spray of water, which is an aversive stimulus, in order to decrease the likelihood of him eating my plant. So it's positive because we're adding a little spritz of water, and punishment because we are trying to decrease the plant eating behavior. In order to measure this behavior, I will be using time sample recording. Time sample recording measures if a behavior has occurred during a specific interval of time in a discontinuous interval. And so in order to do this, I will check on the plant maybe every hour, 3 hours or so for a day and see if he has nibbled on that plant or not. And so in time sample recording, it does not matter how much of the plant has been eaten, but rather if it has during that interval or not. And the way that this will work is my plant does actually show damage if it is eaten, which is why I included that first picture where you can sort of see that he's nibbled some parts off and the plant has leaves that are a little bit dead. And the way that this will be done is my door, which is usually closed, will remain open while I am at home, and then every time I go to my room, which is usually maybe every 45 minutes, maybe every hour, sometimes every 2 hours, and I will check for damage during that day. To begin the punishment, I will start with a 1-to-1 ratio, which is known as continuous reinforcement. And so in this process, each response is given a direct consequence. So for example, for each plant that he nibbles, he will get a little spray of water on his booty. So for example, if I see him near the plant or nibbling on the plant, I will spray him. If he comes again and he nibbles on it again, another spray. And if he's there again, another spray. So each plant nibbling behavior will lead to a spray. And since this is not a permanent option, I can't follow him around for the rest of my life and keep spraying him every time he, tries to eat my plant or every time he tries to eat a cactus, or he's tried to eat fake plants in the past as well. So one thing that I must do is stretch the ratio, which means that I must gradually increase the number of responses before I do spray him with a bottle. So I have to be very, very careful with this part because he is a very slow learner. He's kind of a little dumb. I don't know how to put it nicely. I will have to make sure to go very gradually with this process. And so while I will be starting out with a continuous reinforcement schedule, I will eventually decrease to maybe a 2-to-1 ratio and then a 3-to-1 ratio before I can finally, trust him and make sure he's not eating plants until he gets ill or, nibbling on my cacti or anything. The plan for this, as of right now, is I am on a 1-to-1 ratio with him right now, so my door is always closed, and he's only allowed in my room when I'm in my room. And that's not only because of the plants, I also have a lot of glass containers, and he likes to knock those over, but, one step at a time. The point is, right now I can stick to a 1-to-1 ratio, but I do eventually want to be able to leave my door open and let him come and go as he pleases. Another reason I would like to stretch the ratio after some time is because a continuous reinforcement schedule is quite prone to extinction, and I would like to have this be a more permanent fix to his behavior rather than something that could potentially only last a few days and then end. After I realize that he's being a little bit more distant around the plant, I will start to decrease the spray ratio once he is a little bit more distant towards the plant, and this will mean that if he nibbles on it once, I'll maybe ignore it, but on the second time that I see him doing it, then I'll give him a spray, and hopefully this will allow him to decrease the behavior on his own without necessarily relying on a reinforcer. With time, I do hope to bring this down to a 3-to-1 ratio, and eventually from there just keep stretching the ratio until he has proven that the behavior is a learned behavior. One concern that I've had is how would I avoid extinction after I have stretched the ratio to the point where he no longer needs the stimulus to avoid my plants. And so extinction refers specifically to the absence of a learned behavior. And this happens when the behavior is no longer followed by the consequence. So for example, the fear would be that when he does not get sprayed by water anymore, he might continue to start nibbling on the plant. And if he does stop biting my plants, I will make sure to keep a spray bottle nearby to make sure that if I do see him nibbling, say maybe in a month from now, then I will be able to spray him once more and effectively cause spontaneous recovery. And spontaneous recovery refers to the process of reintroducing an aversive stimuli. And if I do so, then according to spontaneous recovery, he will quickly relearn how to leave my plants alone without having to go through the same process as we did before. So since this is something that does relate to my cat, I did want to actually go through with this and actually go through the positive punishment. And so here's the spritzer that I will actually be using. It is for plants, but it does spray water, so I think that's good enough. In this clip, you can kind of see how he is a little hesitant with my plant, and that's because I have been spraying him for the past few days. And here he is just sort of approaching the plant, getting quick to nibble, but as soon as he gets sprayed, he runs off. And I did utilize a 1-to-1 ratio in this part. So here he is again with my plant, and as soon as he starts nibbling, I'll give him a little spray on his tush, and he'll just run off. It's nice because this doesn't deter him from my room at all. It doesn't deter him from me at all, which is my favorite part about it, but it does still deter him from my plants. As you can see here, he's being a little bit more distant, and this is one of the concerns about punishment, that punishment may lead to harsh feelings towards whoever is delivering the punisher. And this is typically because the subject will develop an association between the person who is delivering the punisher and the actual punisher itself. But luckily we don't have that situation, which is nice because I love him.